Invisible to the world that moved around her, Amina was a shadow in the towering skyscrapers of the corporate giants. To them, she was just the maid, a background fixture sweeping floors and emptying trash cans. But behind her quiet demeanor and simple uniform lay a mind sharp as a razor, one that had survived hardship and learned to read between the lines of power and deception. Her story began on an ordinary night when she found herself alone in the CEO's boardroom, tasked with cleaning after a tense meeting that had run late. As she wiped the long polished table, a thick folder left carelessly under a chair caught her eye. She hesitated, but curiosity won over. Her fingers traced the papers inside: complex legal jargon, contract clauses, merger terms. But one clause stood out, hidden deep in the fine print, something amiss that did not sit right with her. It was a clause that threatened to hand over the company's most valuable intellectual property to a rival corporation, effectively selling the soul of the company without anyone's knowledge. Amina's heart raced as she realized what this meant. A betrayal at the highest level, one designed to enrich a few and destroy the many. But how could she stop it? She was just a maid, invisible and powerless. Yet she remembered the lessons of her past. Courage was not reserved for the powerful, and knowledge was a weapon stronger than gold. That night, Amina decided to fight back. She began by quietly documenting the contract, taking photos with her phone when no one was watching, memorizing details, and piecing together a pattern of deceit. Every day she navigated the labyrinth of corporate offices, gathering whispers, overhearing conversations, and building a case that no one expected from a woman in her position. Her presence was overlooked, her voice unheard, but her determination grew stronger with each passing moment. Slowly, she found allies in unexpected places: an honest security guard who believed in justice, a sympathetic receptionist tired of corporate corruption, and a retired lawyer who saw in Amina the spark of brilliance he once had. Together, they began to plan how to expose the conspiracy before it was too late. Meanwhile, the boardroom buzzed with excitement over the merger, blind to the storm brewing in the shadows. Amina's every move had to be calculated. One misstep could mean losing everything. The night before the contract signing, she faced her greatest test: breaking into a restricted filing room to retrieve the original documents and proof of the altered contract. The risk was immense, the tension unbearable, but her resolve was unshakable. When the boardroom meeting finally came, Amina stepped forward, no longer invisible, her voice cutting through the polished lies like a blade. She revealed the truth, piece by piece, shocking the powerful men and women who had thought her beneath notice. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Some denied, some tried to silence her, but the evidence was irrefutable. The company was saved, the corrupt leaders exposed, and Amina's bravery became a beacon of hope for the forgotten and underestimated. Her story reminded everyone that strength does not come from titles or money, but from courage, knowledge, and the will to stand up against giants. This was just the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for Amina, but for all those who dare to fight back. After her courageous confrontation in the boardroom, Amina's life transformed in ways she had never imagined. No longer was she invisible. To those around her, whispers of the black maid who saved a corporation spread through the city like wildfire. Yet, with newfound recognition came danger and resistance from powerful forces determined to maintain their control. The days following the revelation were tense. Amina returned to her modest apartment, the familiar quiet of her life now punctuated by the distant echo of phone calls and hushed meetings discussing her fate. The company's board scrambled to contain the fallout, with some executives attempting to discredit her, painting her as an opportunist or an intruder meddling where she did not belong. But Amina knew that her truth was stronger than their lies. She leaned on the allies she had quietly gathered: the security guard who watched over her safety, the receptionist who passed her critical information, and the retired lawyer who helped her understand the intricacies of corporate law. Together, they built a support network that gave Amina strength and protection, yet the battle was far from over. Powerful interests were still at play, with threats whispered behind closed doors and shadowy figures watching her every move. Amina became cautious, learning the art of secrecy and careful communication, balancing the need to expose corruption with the imperative to protect herself and those who helped her. Amid the turmoil, Amina's story inspired others. Employees who had felt powerless began to speak out. Journalists seeking the truth dug deeper, and a public hungry for justice rallied behind the unlikely heroine. She was no longer just a maid. She was a symbol of resistance, a testament to the fact that no one, regardless of their background, was too small to fight injustice. As the media spotlight shone brighter, Amina found herself thrust into a world of interviews, legal battles, and intense scrutiny. She faced moments of doubt and exhaustion, but never wavered. Her past struggles had forged a resilience that no pressure could break. The legal case against the corrupt executives intensified, revealing layers of deceit and greed that shocked even the most seasoned observers. Amina's testimony became the cornerstone of the prosecution's argument, a vivid narrative of courage and integrity that cut through the fog of corporate manipulation. Despite the pressure, she remained grounded, remembering the quiet strength that had carried her this far, the strength born from years of being overlooked, underestimated, and marginalized. Slowly, the tides began to turn. The corrupt leaders were held accountable. The company began to rebuild its reputation, and reforms were put in place to prevent such betrayals in the future. Amina's victory was not just personal but collective, a triumph for all those who had been silenced or ignored. But beyond the headlines and courtroom victories, Amina's journey had deeper meaning. It was a story about the power of truth, the courage to stand up for what is right, and the indomitable spirit of a black maid who dared to challenge giants and win. And as she looked toward the future, she knew her fight was far from over. The world had many battles yet to face, and she was ready to face them head-on. The weeks that followed Amina's courtroom triumph were a whirlwind of new experiences and challenges. The story of the black maid who fought giants had captured the public's imagination, turning her into an unlikely celebrity. But beneath the applause and media attention, Amina was navigating a complex new reality that tested her resolve in ways she never expected. Invitations flooded in, speaking engagements, interviews, and community events where she was celebrated as a beacon of hope and courage. Yet with each public appearance, she was acutely aware of the fragile line she walked between being a symbol and remaining true to herself. Despite the praise, there were moments of isolation. Friends and family, who once knew her in a different light, struggled to reconcile the woman now standing in the spotlight with the humble maid they had known. The pressure to live up to the expectations of countless strangers weighed heavily on her shoulders. Yet Amina's core remained unchanged. She spent quiet evenings reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, the years of cleaning offices, the stolen glances at legal documents, the courage to speak up when it mattered most. Those memories were her anchor, reminding her that her worth was never tied to titles or public acclaim. Meanwhile, the fallout from the corporate scandal continued to ripple through the industry. Reforms were enacted and oversight committees formed, but resistance from entrenched interests remained strong. Amina found herself drawn into advocacy work, using her voice to push for systemic change and protect others from suffering similar injustices. Her experiences gave her unique insight into the intersection of race, class, and power, and she became a fierce advocate for equity and transparency in corporate governance. Alongside her activism, Amina pursued education, determined to deepen her understanding of the law that had become central to her life. Nights spent studying were long and often exhausting, but each lesson was a step toward empowerment and a future where she could fight even more effectively for justice. In her personal life, new relationships blossomed, built on respect and shared values. The man who had once barely noticed her presence now saw her for who she truly was, a woman of strength, intelligence, and unyielding integrity. But Amina remained cautious, aware that trust had to be earned and that her path was her own to define. Through it all, she maintained a quiet dignity, never forgetting the moments of invisibility and hardship that had shaped her. Her story was not just one of victory, but of resilience, humility, and the relentless pursuit of truth. As the sun set over the city skyline, Amina stood on her apartment balcony, looking out at the world she was determined to change. The battles ahead would be many and the road uncertain, but she was ready. Because the black maid who fought back was no longer just a survivor. She was a leader, a warrior, and a force to be reckoned with. The fight that Amina had started did not end with the courtroom victory. In many ways, it was only just beginning. As the dust settled on the scandal, the real work of rebuilding and reforming began. Corporations that once thrived on secrecy and exploitation were now under intense scrutiny. Amina's role evolved from a whistleblower to a strategist and advocate. She partnered with grassroots organizations and legal aid groups, working to ensure that justice was accessible to those who had long been silenced. Her days were filled with meetings, planning sessions, and outreach programs, yet she never lost the humility that had made her story so powerful. At times, the opposition grew fierce. Former allies turned adversaries and new threats emerged, aiming to intimidate or discredit her. Anonymous letters, shadowy figures lurking near her home, and whispered warnings became part of her reality. But Amina refused to be cowed. Instead, she fortified her circle, leaning on trusted friends and allies who shared her vision of a more just and transparent world. Education remained a cornerstone of her journey. Enrolling in law school, she pursued her studies with determination, balancing classes with her activism and the demands of public life. The halls of the university were a new battlefield, where she encountered both support and skepticism. Yet, every challenge strengthened her resolve. Meanwhile, the community she came from rallied around her. The story of the maid who had outwitted Billionaires was not just inspiring, it was transformational. Young girls saw in her a role model, proof that their dreams were valid regardless of circumstance. Local leaders invited her to speak, and schools incorporated her story into lessons about courage, perseverance, and social justice. But beyond the public acclaim, Amina wrestled with personal questions. The journey had exacted a toll. Moments of loneliness, self-doubt, and the burden of expectations. She sought solace in quiet walks through the city's parks, where the noise of the world faded and she could reconnect with her inner strength. It was during these moments that she realized the true depth of her impact, not just the legal victories or media headlines, but the spark of hope she ignited in others. In boardrooms and courtrooms, in classrooms and community centers, Amina's story was a rallying cry for change. As she prepared for the next chapter of her life, she remained grounded in the knowledge that her voice mattered, that even the smallest among us could challenge the mightiest. The black maid who fought back had become a symbol of empowerment, a testament to the power of truth and the unbreakable spirit of those who dare to stand tall. The final chapter of Amina's journey unfolded not in a courtroom or rally, but in a quiet moment of personal triumph. Years of relentless work, sacrifice, and courage had transformed her from the unseen maid into a respected leader and advocate. With her law degree in hand and a network of supporters behind her, she launched an initiative aimed at empowering marginalized workers across the country, those whose stories, like hers, had too often been ignored. The program provided legal aid, education, and a platform for voices silenced by power and prejudice. Yet, even as Amina celebrated her accomplishments, she never lost sight of the struggles still ahead. The systemic injustices she fought were deeply entrenched, requiring persistent effort and unwavering dedication. She remained vigilant, always ready to speak truth to power, to shine a light where darkness prevailed. Her story became a beacon, inspiring a new generation to believe in justice and equality. But the greatest victory was not in the headlines or accolades. It was in the countless lives touched by her example, the dreams rekindled, and the courage sparked in hearts that once feared to hope. Amina often reflected on how far she had come, from the shadowed hallways where she cleaned offices unseen, to the podiums where her voice commanded attention. The journey was proof that no matter how humble your beginnings, your truth has power. As the sun rose over the city she loved, Amina stepped forward with quiet confidence. The black maid who once faced giants had shattered their empires, not with violence, but with words, wisdom, and an unyielding spirit. And her story was far from over.